Good afternoon, everyone. It is a really strange world that we live in at the moment. I'm sure we have all been surprised and confused by some of the events that have happened. And being surprised and confused leads us to think about how could we build some foresight so that we wouldn't be surprised as often. When we think about foresight, one of the important things is to define what does it mean. And in my books, as a pragmatic entrepreneur, it means that we are prepared for what happens. We survive what happens. Just foresight doesn't mean that we survive. You can predict a forest fire, but if the forest burns down, regardless of your prediction, then that is pretty much worthless. If the forest doesn't burn down, it doesn't matter whether you predicted the fire or not. You were prepared for the fires and you prevented the damage. So let's think about strategic foresight in the context of cyber from that point of view. To understand what will happen next, it's not enough to understand what has already happened. We need to understand why things have happened. And we are typically pretty bad at converting understanding into preparations and action. For example, for a long time, scientists have warned that there will be a pandemic. And yet the world was not prepared at all when COVID-19 hit us. Or in the corporate context, Kodak invented the digital photography. They invented the first digital camera, and yet they were bankrupted by digital photography. And this was completely predictable, just watching how technology evolved. So, in order to create foresight, we just need to observe very well what happens. We need to think deeply about why things have happened and what would happen if the same things would continue trending that are currently trending. And then we need to act. But all three of these sound simple, but they are very, very difficult. They are all separate muscles that we need to build through exercise. And there are multiple fundamental forces shaping the future. Things such as demographics, technology innovation, epidemics, historical facts, like the Taiwan question, or Russia's invasion in Ukraine. They are embedded in history. Environment, the global warming, these are fundamental forces shaping the future. Let's start to observe a little bit about what is influencing cyber. One thing, as I mentioned, is demographics. For example, in South Korea, the balance in the size of the population would be 2.1 children per female. At the moment, it's about 0.8, so very far from that balance. The UN population forecast for China is that there will be 700 million Chinese in the year 2100. 700 million, down over 50% from where they are today. In 2050, 50%, 1 out of 2, for all children born will be born in Africa. Already 10 years earlier, 40% of newborns will be Muslims. These are all individual data points, but they will have an impact in the world that we will live in over the next decades. So you could say that, so what? And that brings us to the thinking part from the observations. Just a couple examples. Already today, people over 50 account for more than half of the world's purchasing power. That has an impact on a lot of things at the surface level, but also the fact that, say, elections are more focused on topics that are important for the elderly population, or medicine is more focused on the elderly population. Those will lead to other things, second-level outcomes, which will lead to other things that are third-level outcomes. A typical funny-sounding, but quite a sort of indicative outcome would be that sales of adult diapers are outselling baby diapers in a number of countries. Not important for any of us, but important for the people in that business. So, what do we know about technology and cyber? One of the fundamental things that are influencing many of the things that leave us confused is the value creation power of technology. I think we all superficially understand this, but very few of us have really stopped to think about it. This chart shows the portion of the world stock market that is based on technology company valuations out of all publicly listed companies globally. In 2014, roughly 10 years ago, it used to be about 6%, and it grew to over 25% by the end of last year. This means that during those 10 years, the value of technology, using publicly listed technology companies as a proxy, the value of technology grew by over 550%, whereas all other businesses experienced value growth of 60%, a difference of almost 10x. If this same trend would continue, technology would create over $120 trillion of value over the next 10 years. That is such a high amount that it is moving the tectonic plates beneath the world economy. And this is a driving force behind the scenes for many of the things that leave us confused. It has led to the weaponizing of the economy, which we see through a list of different actions, such as tariffs, but many other things as well. Somebody weaponizing their economy forces others to start to defend. And there are many things that we can do to defend, such as nearshoring and friendshoring, which is oddly enough becoming a topic in cybersecurity as well. Because in this weird world, who can we trust? Who can we rely on? From the time this company was founded 37 years ago, one of my primary objectives was to create a company that people could rely on, a trustworthy partner, somebody who would do the right thing. Somebody might say that that was a very young guy, maybe being naive or a bit of a techno-romantic, but I still believe that. And that's one reason why WithSecure has stayed a European cyber technology company. Many of the other European cyber companies have been sold. I have always felt that it is value, it is an intrinsic value that we remain a European company and an independent company. and we can be relied on and trusted. I don't know if you heard, but Microsoft recently shut down the email service for the ICC, the International Criminal Court, because of Israel. And apparently without warning, basically paralyzed the ICC, which operates in the Netherlands. And as far as I know, there was no court order or anything forcing Microsoft to do that. They just wanted to follow the policy of Washington at this time. I would have never believed that that could happen. And when it happens once, the question is, when will something similar happen the next time? And if you can shut down email, can you shut down cybersecurity as well? Which is a cloud service nowadays. Or maybe you can just threaten to shut it down. So it feels as if this reliability and trustworthiness that I have believed so strongly in for such a long time is becoming even more topical nowadays. The world that we live in could be described as US being the wealthiest economy, the greatest value generation over the last decades. They have a new administration that is shaking things up. Regulation is rather decreasing than increasing. China, the world's largest middle class, 800 million people, huge market. A leading technology country, in my opinion. Not in every single segment, but enough of them that I feel that they have surpassed the US. That's just a subjective opinion. They have an authoritarian government, which makes them perhaps a bit unpredictable, but we have learned that democratic governments can be unpredictable as well. And there's the Taiwan question. And then we have EU that needs access to both these markets, burdened by heavy regulation. Hopefully the omnibus will help. And we have a fragmented home market. And then, especially in Europe, we have the question of Russia. And in the whole world, we have the question of the survival of the human race, global warming, biodiversity, etc. And unfortunately, many of the things that I mentioned first are overshadowing the latter topics, perhaps the bigger topics. Perhaps the biggest value driver for technology is AI. So let's observe. What do we know about AI? I'll mention 4 things. First, the capability of these models is growing and surpassing human capabilities in more and more areas. The price of the large language models, which is the most visible and maybe the most powerful and fastest developing area in machine learning, the cost has been coming down at a very fast pace, up to 900x in 12 months. So capabilities increase, surpassing human abilities, price coming down, investments going up. Just VC investments last year were over 100 billion. The large US tech companies have announced to spend more than 300 billion this year alone in AI-related investments, mostly in compute, but focused on AI. This is the third thing. The fourth thing is that competencies in AI development continue to increase. As the students studying machine learning, the number of them has exploded. So what's our conclusion? Capabilities growing, cost coming down, investments going up, and expertise increasing tremendously. We can expect much more from AI going forward. I personally believe that the era of an AGI is not far away. It could happen in 6 months, it could happen in 2 years, something in between. And there will be debate on what is real AGI. For me, the definition is that if I would hire a remote worker and I would communicate with him or her over WhatsApp, Signal, email, whatever, and if I feel that I hired a good person after that cooperation, but the person is actually an AGI, it's an AI. If the cooperation feels good, I hired a good person, then that's the definition of AGI for me. And I don't think we are too far away from that. So how do people react to this fundamental, transformative change that is probably fairly close by? Some want to shut the barn door. Very difficult or impossible to do. The huge value creation opportunity means that this is a politically and security policy-wise a key topic and creates a lot of greed and fear and uncertainty. And this is why it is very difficult to agree globally on a good policy on how do we build and govern AI. Training data, for example, is extremely valuable. We have pretty much used all the data that is there at the moment, and synthetic training data is the big thing for the future, but we are also generating new data all the time. Every one of us is. And the question is who gets access to that for training purposes. Here in Europe, we think very highly of privacy, but when greed comes into the picture, the privacy regulations may take a back seat. Lethal autonomous weapon systems in a world that experiences a number of wars means that there are absolutely a large number of countries that are developing lethal autonomous weapon systems. And some of those, one could say, are being developed in the area of cyber, attacking our critical infrastructure. I think everybody agrees that we need global rules, but nobody knows how to get them set up. So what do we know about cyber? There's a long list of things, and it's only the beginning of the list. But we clearly see a growing number of breaches. We see still a growing number of ransomware attacks and incidents. We see more and more supply chain attacks. Humans still remain the weakest link. Scams, especially for the consumers, have increased, but also in the corporate space. The cost per incident continues to grow. And of course, nobody knows exactly, but the estimate is that if cybercrime would be a country, it would be the world's third largest economy. In Europe, companies have paid over 5 billion in fines for GDPR violations. Last year alone, in 23, companies paid 2.1 billion for GDPR violations in Europe. So we Europeans are quite cautious in doing things that relate to user data, people's information. And there are similar potential fines for AI-related development. And this is one reason why Europe is behind in AI. And I don't have a solution for that. The regulations that we have change very slowly. We just need to push forward with our AI-related work. So if we have observed those trends, What's the conclusion if we think about them? Well, one thing that we can focus on is what will AI mean for cyber. All sorts of deep fakes will become more and more common. Potentially, an attack against a corporate will go from a breach to a payload in seconds instead of being a hands-on keyboard attack over a number of weeks. Encryption is becoming vulnerable, and even though we have quantum-proof cryptography available, we are very slow to implement that. Attackers combine tech with emotional urgency and obfuscation to manage the human angle. Again, a long list. Many things most likely will continue on the trajectory we have observed over the last several years. We need to think about sort of the trends that we can see and ask ourselves, do I recognize a force that is acting on this trend that will either accelerate it or decelerate it? If we can't name a force, then we should at least entertain a scenario where that trend will continue and ask ourselves, what will happen if it continues for 3 more years? For example, the value of technology is one such thing. If we don't know a reason why technology value creation would not continue, let's at least assume that it will continue and think about how can we act on that assumption. So how would we act? I think security needs to be proactive whenever possible. That should be our key drive. But when proactive security is not feasible or enough, security should be automatic and fast to react. When we don't dare automate things, or we are not able to, we need to make sure that we have AI-supported top professionals at hand. And if we can do those 3 things well, I think we are in a pretty good shape. But this is all a muscle that we need to continuously exercise. When Jack Nicklaus hit his 18th hole-in-one in golf, a journalist came to him, patting him on his shoulder, saying that, "You are such a lucky guy." And he was a bit upset about that statement and responded that, "You know, it's a funny thing, I have noticed that the more I practice, the luckier I get." And this applies to cybersecurity as well. It applies to foresight as well. It applies to being able to observe well, also knowing what to observe and what to ignore. It applies to thinking about what we know, and it definitely applies to acting on what we have concluded. It is up to you to decide how you will act. But I can promise you that WithSecure will continue to acting based on the same principles we have applied for such a long time. Partnerships are key for us, and we wish to be the best possible partner for all of you. Thank you very much.